Hi, my name is Bharat Krishnan, and I am moderating this panel today. Some Like It Hot, Writing Sex and Character Development. Olga is a screenwriter and amateur seamstress, gardener, and drag king from the Netherlands, where she lives with her wife, husband, 3 sons, and 11 bikes. Olga worked on Dutch television series, feature films, and shorts such as The Escape, Putin, and The Shadow of Boniface. Her screenplay, Voortjagers, won the prize for Best Original Screenplay in the Netherlands and Belgium of 2020. Besides her interest in movies, Olga also writes for immersive games and theater and debuted in 2018 with her young adult sci-fi thriller, The Drowned Country. In the fall, her second book will be published, a series of erotic novellas celebrating diverse and post-Me Too sexuality. Megan Van Dyke is a fantasy romance author with a love for all things that include magic and kissing, especially fairy tales and anything with a happily ever after. Her debut, Second Star to the Left, released from City Owl Press in February 2022. She has multiple forthcoming titles releasing in this year, 2023, and beyond. Many of Megan's stories include themes of family, whether born into or found, and a sense of home and belonging, which are important aspects of her life as well. When not writing, Megan loves to cook, play video games, explore the great outdoors, and spend time with her family. A Southerner by birth and at heart, Megan currently lives with her family in Colorado. Lindsay is an adult rom-com writer from British Columbia, Canada. Her debut novel, Not Your Basic Love Story, is set for publication in August 2022 by Rising Publishing Collective. Lindsay has recently joined PS Literary as a client of Claire Harris. She enjoys writing steamy scenes as well as fun, witty banter. When not writing, she's managing a hot yoga and fitness studio while looking after her 2 little boys. At age 10, Shaylin secretly stole her mother's copy of Clan of the Cave Bear and fell madly in love with love stories. Now, as an author, she still can't get enough. The tales she spins all center around affairs of the heart. To her, that's what makes a story truly worth telling. In addition to writing fantasy fiction, Shaylin practices medicine, scuba dives, plays the piano, and once rode her bicycle from the Pacific Ocean to the Atlantic. She lives in Denver with her incredible husband, their identical twin daughters, and 2 adorable rescue dogs. The family can usually be found in the mountains, either hiking up or skiing down. Thank you so much for being here today. So I think the number one question when you're thinking of a topic such as this one is, what do you think makes a sex scene hot? How do you make it erotic?
Well, I mean, I think one of the most important things is consent. I mean, you want the characters to be fully on board, fully in the moment, and 100% wanting what is happening or about to happen. And I think that that's such an important thing for the reader to be able to buy into and to embrace as well, is to know that the characters are there, that the characters in the moment, they want this, they're feeling good about it, they're excited about it. And I think that really translates to a good reading experience as well. And then, I mean, at that point, it's really just about the author embracing the characters and kind of going with what they like, what do they enjoy, what are they feeling in that moment, and trying to accurately translate that onto the page so that the reader can almost be like they're right there, which in some ways, maybe everyone doesn't want to be exactly right there, but I think a lot of us do. And especially when we're reading, steamier scenes, you want to really be enveloped in that scene and feel those emotions and have it affect you just like you would any pivotal scene in a book. I mean, you want it to impact you as a person. And so I think that's really what you're trying to do, is just be honest with the characters and themselves, let them give themselves to the page and to the moment, and just be as honest as you can in translating that.
I think the main thing that makes a sex scene hot is the same thing that makes sex hot. You need a lot of buildup. You need foreplay. So the foreplay of the sex scene in a book is everything that happens before the sex scene. So you really need to get these characters talking, connecting, that push and pull, getting close, but being forced away. That is everything that gets the reader primed and ready for the sex scene. And it's really important that when the sex scene happens, it's like everyone's eager. It's time. Let's get these 2 people together. So I think that's what really makes it hot, is that delayed gratification.
I like that too. Yeah, I mean, the short answer for me is just that the characters want it. If the characters want it bad enough that the reader wants it, then that's when it feels like a big payoff for me. And I like what Lindsay said about the delayed gratification. I think there needs to be a lot of tension there. The more tension, the better. If it's kind of a culmination of the push and pull between two people, that's when it really can be explosive, I think.
Yeah, I think apart from what you're saying, which I agree with, is I think you really have to believe what you're writing. I think that's the main thing for me. You don't necessarily have to be your characters or your character's sexuality. I think that there must be something there that goes click for yourself and that connects with your own sort of zing moment. And I think that's really hard because like all writing, it requires you to a certain point to be vulnerable and to look inward and also answer the question for yourself: what turns you on and what is it that you find sexy to write? And I think because in a lot of more generic romance and erotic novels, you will read like, I don't know, this character is so handsome, I want him. But I'm always thinking, what is it? What do you want? What is it specifically that turns you on? It's not just somebody who's handsome. So I think that's the main thing for me, and also the main struggle. I think is that sense of vulnerability, like, what do you find sexy, and write about that thing, because I think that makes it come alive and makes it as hot as possible.
Great, thank you. Building off that, question of what turns you on, Olga, how do you think you can use kink to delve deeper into characterization, and what does that mean to you?
Well, I think like with kind of hobbies, I think it can tell you a lot about a certain character, because what turns a character on tells a lot about who that person is. I think when you're going, I think, in the kink direction, I think it is a fine line, because it can tell something about your character, but it shouldn't be a shorthand. I think it's sometimes used a bit too much, like I don't know, the boss who likes to dominate women or something like that. That's the first thing that springs to my mind. Or somebody who's traumatized and therefore will have certain sexual preferences. So I think kink can be great to add certain flavor or extras or deepen a character, but I think you should be careful with it, because personally I really don't like, especially because I'm a queer polyamorous person myself, so I see that sometimes people use sexuality to draw conclusions that aren't right necessarily. So use it, but be careful to use it not as a shorthand, but really to explore your character.
I haven't really actually written that much. I tend to write more vanilla stuff. But for me, it's like sex scenes aren't necessarily about the sex, it's more about the emotion behind it. So that's just not something I've explored yet as a writer, because I feel like I haven't written characters that have needed to go into that area. But like thinking of 50 Shades of Grey, that's a really interesting one, because that's all about the character's kind of process of self-discovery. And I really liked it in that series, because it was about this woman discovering herself through that. So if you can use it as a vehicle to bring out other aspects of the character, I think that's when it works best.
I do think that kink can show the give and take between the characters involved. It can help with building trust, learning about one another and themselves, like you said before, with different avenues of kink. And I think a really good example of kink in a rom-com that I read recently was Farrah Heron's book, The Chai Factor. She had some really great kink where the woman was dominant over this big, huge lumberjack type guy. And even though the scene was fade to black, they had some really hilarious and sexy dialogue going on. And so I thought it was really interesting how she used kink to develop the characters, the relationship between each other, made it steamy, but still had a closed door scene. I thought that was really good, really well done.
I think that's great points. I think sometimes people use it as a way to like spice up a scene, but it's only going to do that if it's really bringing out the characters themselves. I mean, if that's something they're into or brings out a characteristic that maybe you haven't been able to fully explore in them yet. And I mean, I think any good sex scene does that. It really gives you a depth to the character that you haven't gotten yet, or shows maybe a vulnerability that they have, or how it's healing some kind of wound that they have inside. And I think that's an important thing to do. And I think kink can be a part of that. But I think sometimes it is given a little bit too much prevalence and it's just there for the wow factor. And it's not doing justice to the character or doing work for the story. So, I mean, I think like anything, you really want it to be working for your character and deepening the reader's understanding of them. And if it's not doing that, then it might be better saved for something else.
Thank you so much for making that point, Megan. Really important, and I think it leads really naturally into the next question, which is I think probably one of the most important questions here. Are there ways in which you feel sexual interactions provide a particularly useful tool in showing character growth and character development?
I mean, I think so, because a lot of times when you get into these really sexual and emotional scenes, you're getting to someone's vulnerabilities. You're getting to the heart of that character and what's going on in them and what they've dealt with. And I feel like it's a good time to really, really dig deep, kind of, force them to open up and maybe share things with the reader or with other characters that they haven't shared up until now. And I think that vulnerability is so important. And honestly, it's one of the things that I love so much, because even as an author, you're being vulnerable. I mean, anytime you write anything, you're putting some of yourself onto the page, even if the characters aren't quite like you, or it's a different setting or a whole different world, there's still an element of you that is there. And I mean, I think that's true for sex scenes as well. And it should be true for the characters. I mean, if the character's not opening up, if they're not being vulnerable, you're not getting to see that growth. And I just think that's such an important part of the scene.
Yeah, I think Megan sort of summarized it for me. I think this great thing about sex is they always say like this show don't tell thing, and sex is a great way to show don't tell, because in itself it's an act of communicating in another way with your body or your feelings or your emotions, and to other people's bodies that isn't telling. It's purely showing. And I like to use it in a way to show how a person is feeling and growing, and what they're struggling with. Also, I'm really interested, especially post Me Too, I'm really interested in power balances and how this can shift in scenes, or how people relate to each other. So I think, and sex is a great way to show, I don't know, the sort of connection these people have with each other. So I always, I think bad sex scenes are just the mechanical acts, like, I don't know, like when you would describe how somebody's eating. But I think the great thing is you can really build a scene with it. It begins somewhere, it has its own tension arc. People grow, maybe balances change or emotions are resolved. So I think that's why I love it as a tool to show what a character is going through at the moment.
Yeah, so I write romance and rom-coms exclusively. So there's an expectation for a happily ever after or a happily for now. So you have to show that with this time, with this person, it's different than before. So how is it different? Is it better? Do they feel safer? Do they feel sexier? Do they feel listened to? And you have to see how this relationship is different than the rest and how it catapults these characters into the direction of love, especially if you're at the midpoint of love plot thrust, if you follow plotting.
Yeah, I try to time the scenes that I write to coincide with points at which the relationship between the two partners is at an emotional turning point. I think it's more about quality than quantity. And certainly it depends what genre you're writing. If you're writing erotic romance, it's going to be a different expectation from the reader than if you're writing steamy romance or sweet romance. So I think you also need to write to your audience. But for me, I kind of use the scenes as a signpost for, hey, something's changing between these two people. And that's when I find it most useful and most meaningful.
How do you decide how explicit a sex scene and their descriptions should be?
Well, I think there too, I really try to follow the character and how a character themselves would talk about sex, because there are people who are really comfortable with explicit words and who would just call things as they are, and there's people who are into field languages, and there's some people who don't like one or the other, but I think there's such a variety in the way we talk about sex and how we describe it ourselves. So I try to follow the language that I think my character would use for it, because I don't mind veiled language if you're writing about somebody who's prudish or something. I think it's the nice thing to do. And but there's also people who will just say, well, it's this, so then I'll use their words. And I think there's something funny here, because the Dutch language is really harsh. I think I would love to talk about other languages in the world, but I think ours is one of the worst if you want to try to write sex scenes, because all our sex words are so horrible. They're so harsh. They're sounding so horrible. Even when I have sex myself, I really struggle to use some words because I think it's so aromantic. I don't want to use these words. And so that's an extra struggle for me, because I want to make romantic, erotic scenes, and I don't want to interrupt the flow with this horrible language thing we have here. So I think this for me is an extra complication, I think.
I take a lot of cues from the character on how explicit their scenes want to be. I mean, personally, I like explicit scenes just because, again, you're getting so much of that depth of the character in another level that you wouldn't get to see and understand if the door was completely closed. But I mean, some characters are a lot more confident and out there and willing to say exactly what they want, and they're happy to have that on page. And then I've written other characters that are a little bit more shy and demure, and you've got to go with their voice. You don't want to suddenly change their voice for a scene just because it's what you want. You've always got to stay true to that character. And if they are a little bit more shy and reserved, it may be a shorter scene. There may not be as much description. It may be completely internally focused. I mean, I've actually had one scene I wrote where really didn't describe the physical act that was going on that much at all. It was all about what was going on inside that character at the moment, because that's how they wanted to present it. I mean, they were a shyer character that didn't want to give the detailed description of exactly what all was happening between them and their partner. They just wanted to express how it was affecting them and the emotional results of that. And I mean, I think it was still a very beautiful, impactful scene, but it's just a different level than some others where characters are very upfront about what they want and willing to be descriptive. I think it just varies based on character to character.
I mean, again, I think you have to think about genre and what your audience is expecting. Someone who is writing erotic romance is going to be very, very different than somebody who's writing sweet romance. And the character also comes into play, and I think others touched on that. But for me, personally, just what I'm comfortable with, I don't tend to get super explicit. And I don't think you have to, really. We kind of all know how the mechanics work. So to me, it heightens the scene to bring in other senses a lot of times. Like, I mean, obviously you have touch there, but what does this person smell like? What does their breathing sound like? putting in small details like that and pulling back the focus from the super explicit stuff, to me, can allow the emotions to kind of well up to the surface a little bit more. So that's the direction I tend to go in, and that's what I like most as a reader.
Yeah, I think everyone made some really excellent points. My only addition would be to say that there's room for everyone to write what they want to write, and there's always going to be readers for that too. So if you're writing a romance novel and you're not comfortable writing certain things, then don't do it. That's fine. Or if you're like me and you like a play-by-play, then that's fine too. There's going to be people for every genre, for every level of steam, whether it's, one eggplant or five. You don't have to worry about, oh, I need to make this steamier and use words that I'm not comfortable with. That's not accurate. You can have a very sexy scene and have a closed door, or have it be a very open door. It's up to you.
Lindsay, I know you've got your debut coming out any month now. What role does consent and contraception play in your scenes?
It is a huge part of every romance and rom-com I've ever read, and I only read contemporary novels that have been published within the last 5 or 6 years. So it's huge right now, and consent should be explicitly given. And I've found that it's very erotic when one character, usually the male character, senses discomfort and stops and explicitly says, we don't need anything to happen if you're not comfortable. And that's a really good spot to build up delayed gratification, boost trust, and really get you ready for the climax later on, if you know what I mean. And then contraception is also used in every single rom-com I've read. And I think it's important because when we're using condoms, it's important for people to feel comfortable and sexy using them. And culturally, we're trying to make contraception sexy, and is part of our responsibilities as writers to create safe spaces and expectations for those people consuming our media. So if you're putting out there that taking the time to take out a condom isn't sexy, well, that's not really what you want to be putting out there into the universe. You can make it fun and silly and sexy and have that be part of people's inner narrative when they're exploring their own sexualities outside of fiction.
Yeah, for consent, I mean, that's so important. And especially writing romance, all of my scenes are consensual. And I think it's important that the characters are explicit about that and saying internally to themselves and also externally to other character that they want this, that it's important to them, they want it, they're all on board. And, characters having the respect to ask for that and to make sure that their partner is completely invested in this scene. And I've even had scenes where characters have pulled back because they sensed maybe this wasn't the moment, or maybe they're not fully there yet, because that is so important. And I think that could, really, one, betray a reader's trust for my romance books that I write, but then also harm the characters if that consent isn't fully there. So I feel like that's such an important part of it. And contraception is interesting for me because I do write fantasy, so it's not always as black and white as being on like a birth control pill. But I've used various methods, everything from the pull-out method to herbal teas and different things like that. And it typically is something that comes up in my books just because that's important to the characters. I mean, that's can affect their lives and their futures, and that's something that I want to be accurate and representative of in the book. So it is generally something that's addressed, maybe not always in the moment, but at least around the moment, if that makes sense.
I think for me, it's mostly the same. I think especially at this moment, we're in such a moment where we're creating this new language for consent, at least in the Netherlands. I think most people are still struggling with what is consent, how do I talk about it, so I think writing at the moment, these erotic stories, we sort of have, I think we have the responsibility to show why we should use it, because it leads to better sex, basically. So especially the novels I'm working on at the moment are are based around this idea, like because so many people are saying, why is this important? Why should we use consent? It's all leading to this really complicated situations. Well, I think if you're using it, you're going to have better sex, and all the people involved are going to have such a better time. So I'm struggling with how to integrate it naturally, because I think we're struggling as people with these questions at the moment. But I really like to think about it, and both in terms of this is how it should be, but also this is what it looks like if it's violated or if somebody changes their minds, because some scenes that are right will be erotic in the moment, but sometimes people afterwards will think, well, I don't think that was such a great idea, and how do you handle that? So this, I think it's a really important topic for me to explore in all kinds of different ways.
How do you decide on the balance between sex and plot, or are they one and the same? Say a little bit about that.
I think they do intersect. Definitely, I think really every scene in your book has a job to move the story forward, to advance the plot in some way, and that includes sex scenes, absolutely. So like I said earlier, quality rather than quantity. It has to be meaningful. I mean, perhaps it's realistic for two people to get together and have a lot of sex. But I never really do that in my books, because I think it's kind of easy for you to lose focus on why it matters. It needs to matter. And so I really try to limit it to, I limit the scenes to when it matters and when something's changing between these two people. And the physical act is more of just a expression of the way in which that relationship is changing.
My first book, I pantsed my whole thing, and I'm getting a little bit of flack for it being an insta-love trope. And I didn't think it was insta-love, but now that I'm looking back at it, I'm like, okay, yeah, I can see how that is the thing that's going on here, because they have sex in very early on, and then it shows the relationship as it develops. So their first sex scene is very physical, and then the mid-sex scene is very emotional, where it's this turning point of love. And then the final sex scene is like where you went through the dark night of the soul, and now they're coming back together for their happily ever after. So it's 3 explicit scenes, one at the beginning, middle, and end, to kind of show the arc that this couple goes through in their relationship. So I agree, it's a great tool that you can use to show people where they are at with themselves, as well as where they are at with each other.
Well, I usually I would say I'm more of a character writer. A plot is plot is one of the points I really try to work on that. So usually what I do is I make up these really nice characters that I really love to write about, and basically I just go with the flow. I usually make some sort of draft for the plot that I want to follow, but for mostly my first draft is just going with the flow and see where the sexy scenes develop, and then go back and really try to get the structure right. And at the moment, I sometimes find that I find it harder to make room for the sex, because there's so many things to talk about, especially because I think sex is such a political topic. I mean, all sex that we write is political, because why is the sex that I have or living with 3 people, why isn't that allowed? But 2 people is. So I think everything that revolves around sex has a political theme somehow. So there's these characters, and then there's my theme, and a few days ago I was struggling with one of the stories I was writing to get sex into it. It was so hard, because I was thinking about all these plot and things, and I wanted to put in it, and I thought, where's the joy? So I think for me, it's sometimes the other way around, that I really want to have a sexy plot and I forget to write the sex. because I'm so busy with other things, which is kind of funny because that's how a lot of people's sex lives work. We have all these things going on, then we forget to have sex. So at the moment, I really have to sit down sometimes and find the joy and the vulnerability and connect with the characters to also make room for the sex that I'm so interested in writing.
I mean, I think plot is still going to be your dominant element. I mean, even in a sexier, steamier book, you're still going to have a lot of plot, because otherwise you just have sex scenes that aren't meaningful. I mean, without plot, without that character development, you can have, a well-written scene, but it's maybe not have the effect on you it should, because you haven't taken time to develop those characters. And I mean, I think for me, a sex scene is just like a natural progression in the relation between those characters. As they grow, as they get to know each other, as they experience different things, there comes to the point where it's kind of moving to that next level. I mean, just like any other step in a relationship, it's something that progresses into and that changes the characters, and that it affects the plot too. I mean, it affects their story and how they're progressing towards whatever their ultimate end goal is. So I think it usually comes up pretty naturally. I mean, just like a lot of things, my characters kind of tell me when they're ready and like, hey, it's happening now. Maybe it's not exactly where I planned it, but it usually always ends up being right. But again, it's just one more way to show those characters and their growth and their development towards their end goal. So I'd say it's secondary to the plot, but definitely, I mean, like a great battle scene or anything else like that, it's something that enhances it, that's exciting, and that shows a whole new dynamic between these characters and their world. So I think it's a very valuable tool, and it's just listening to the characters and finding out where's the right place to show that in their story.
Megan, I want to come back to what you were just saying about sex and plot. What does a novel have to accomplish in your mind before the sex becomes meaningful in the overall scheme of the story?
It's a really great question. I mean, I think to make it meaningful, you have to be invested in the characters. Because, I mean, you can have a great scene, but if you're not already invested in those characters, it can be a bit hollow. I mean, you can have all the right words on the page, but if you don't already have that emotional attachment to these characters and what they're going through, just like any other scene, it's going to read hollow, and it's not going to have the impact that you want it to have on the readers. It's not going to be immersive. It's not going to tug at heartstrings or spark joy if you don't feel anything for these characters already. So, I mean, I think that's such an important part of the progression, is that, like anything else, like if a character dies, but you didn't really care about that character, know anything about them, it's probably not going to have that much of an impact. And I think the very same thing is true of a sex scene. I mean, you want to be already invested in these characters and cheering for them and rooting them on. And this is just one more like happy thing that you can celebrate with them. And I think that's so important, to have had enough time in the story to get invested in those characters, really be there with them. And then, this is just one more step in their journey and one more thing to celebrate and enjoy and kind of relish in the moment with them.
I think sex always has meaning, regardless of where it is in the story. So even if these characters don't know each other very well and they decide to have sex, that has meaning in and of itself, and that's totally fine as long as all parties are consenting. So I think that wherever the writer decides there needs to be a sex scene, it accomplishes a goal of where these characters are at mentally, where they're going, and I think as long as the reader is prepared with, some building of tension, then you're good to go.
Yeah, I think apart from the characters, like Megan said, I think that's a really good point, by the way, because the other day I was thinking about, and then I was thinking about movies and series in particular. What are the moments in what are the couples or the throuples or whatever that really got you, or the relationships? I was watching Our Flag Means Death the other day, and I thought, why am I so invested in these characters? What makes these two characters so? Why do I connect with them? And that's really interesting. But I think for sex scenes in general, I think your theme needs to be there in your sex scenes. I think your sex scenes have to tell the same story as your same story overall. For me, at least, that's really important. because if I don't know, if you're telling some story about, I don't know, equality, your sex scenes are totally off, and telling a wrong story is just, it doesn't add up. So that's the thing I'm looking for in the first place, is what's this story about? What's the theme? What do I want to tell? And how can my sex scenes also tell that same story?
Yeah, like Lindsay said, I mean, you can put it anywhere and it's going to mean different things in different places. And it depends what you're going for. But I tend to write stories where I really like to have my characters be vulnerable with each other before we get to the sexy part. I find that when I can do that, have them be vulnerable with each other, and then the physical side of it becomes an extension of that, that's when it feels most meaningful to me as an author, and also when I'm reading other books as a reader.
I do have one final question, since the panel is called "Some Like It Hot: Writing Sex and Character Development." I had to close us out with this question, and I'll start with you, Olga. What piece, what novel, TV show, movie, what something that comes to your mind does a really good job of balancing the sex and story, and is just a really good portrayal of everything we're talking about right here?
Wow, that's a really cool question, because for the last 2 years, I've been reading hundreds of years of erotic fiction. I'm so interested in just the genre of erotic fiction and what people have used it for. So I've really delved into a library. These are some of my research materials, and it's the oldest book, I think, is from 1740 or something. And actually, it's the best book I've read. It's called Philosophe Thérèse. It's a French book from the 18th century. I can't show you the cover because it's kind of explicit, but it's what I found really cool about it is that it's a philosophical book. So it really explores the themes of religion and sex, which was, of course, in the 18th century, people were really fascinated by this. It's sort of, on the one hand, there's people who are saying like, your abstinence is showing that you value God. And this writer is saying, God has put all these wonderful things on the earth. Who are you to deny it? Aren't you offending your God if you're not enjoying the body you've got? But it's also, the sex scenes are so good and they're so consensual. And I'm thinking it's 1740 and these people understand that both partners or everyone involved, because there's also orgies, because it's France and it's a really nice century. So they all understand that people have to be on board and have to enjoy what they're doing. And people are really respectful about each other's boundaries. There's a lot of women there who don't like penetration because they risk pregnancy. And the men are all totally cool with it. They say, well, there's plenty of other things we can do. So that book, and I've read a lot of this through all the centuries, but this book really rocked my world, because I thought, wow, we're so behind. We don't even realize how prudish and backwards we are living, because these people could teach us a lesson or two about both consent, also enjoying sex, but thinking and talking about sex more openly, and just celebrating it with each other in all kinds of settings. It's not just the man and the woman and the couple. There's also group activities. There's all kinds of things there. It's really, I can really recommend it if you're interested in more historic perspective.
I think I would have to say Outlander. I mean, there's definitely not all of the sex scenes in that series are positive by any means, and she explores a lot of dark themes through them. But I will say that every sex scene in those books has a purpose and a reason for being there, and it accomplishes something in a way that I found really impressive.
There's a show on Netflix called Sex Education, And it is hilarious. It is very, very explicit, and there is very explicit scenes in every episode, so I find it awesome. Um, but it covers lots of different topics about like youth engaging in sex and how to have safe relationships regardless of your gender, sexuality, the things you're into, self-pleasure, all that sort of thing. There's only one trope that I don't think is very healthy that they did, that I won't spoil it for you. But other than that, I think it's a really great show if you enjoy, more open door scenes.
I mean, I guess I'll answer it twofold. So the one that really got me started on a lot of kind of the sexier romance books was Kresley Cole and her Immortals After Dark series. And it's a long running series. And honestly, it's been a while since I've read some of the earlier ones, but I remember that series having such an impact on me and just creating the book and the way she just let her characters grow and experience so much and really let them change through those experiences. I mean, I just really appreciated that. They were good books. I mean, it was engaging, it was exciting, and I just always craved the next one and the next one and the next one. And so, I mean, for me as a writer, that had a lot of inspiration for me. And as an author, I kind of looked to as, wow, I want to be able to have that kind of impact on readers. And I'd say another author who's is writing a little bit more now and that I've kind of more recently picked up on is Katie Roberts. I think she's done a tremendous job of showing consent and body positivity and just, the different ways that people can come together and, explore a lot of different,
Is that Neon Gods?
It is, yeah. So that's one of her recent books in a recent series. But yeah, I mean, she's written a lot of different series and, explores a lot of different pairings and couples and situations and really does a great job with all of them, I think. And just, I'm embracing the characters for who they are and really being very consent and body positivity forward. And I've really appreciated that in the stories I've read of hers recently.
Well, thank you so much for all being part of this important discussion today. And any closing thoughts, Megan?
Closing thoughts, I would say, when I'm writing, I write things that bring me joy. And I think that's important, whether you're writing, steamier scenes or just books in general. I think if it's not bringing you joy, then maybe you're not approaching it from the right angle, or maybe something's off. So I think about that anytime that you're writing, and especially when you're writing these more emotionally driven, internal, important scenes for the characters, make sure that they're sparking the emotions that you want them to. Because if you as the writer are feeling it and enjoying it, then your reader probably will too.
Yeah, well, I have maybe a closing thought and a closing question, because I still, and I don't know if this is the same for you, but I feel here that erotic novels, we don't have a lot, I think, but they're really undervalued. Whenever I'm telling people that my new project is about sex and sexuality, people get really uncomfortable, and I get the feeling that they're saying, "Oh, it's like I don't know if it's the Harlequin romance things. It's like, oh, you're just writing this kind of throwaway pop thing that only women enjoy," and I think that is I think that's so wrong. Because I think it's one of the most vulnerable topics you can write about, because we're all so ashamed about sexuality, and sexuality is so in the shadows still. And here we are writing about the most vulnerable thing at the moment. And so I think that's really interesting, but also a thing I hope that will change in the future, because I don't see why I should be ashamed to write about sex, which I enjoy, and I enjoy exploring people's sexualities, but also their problems and shame with sexuality, in the hope that we can have more open and positive discussions about it, and also more real discussions about it. So when somebody's saying, I went to Avengers 30 or something, I think, why shouldn't you be ashamed about writing violence? But why should I be ashamed about writing about love and connection? So I hope, if you're interested in the topic, just go forward and just do the thing, even if it makes people uncomfortable and all your male friends are saying, that's so nice you're writing this book, but I'm not going to read it. just do it, because I think it's really brave and vulnerable work we're doing here. And I don't know, I think it's important.
Yeah, I just want to say that there's something out there for everyone. That includes books with sex. So if you're into it, I guarantee you there's other writers who are into it. There's other readers who are wanting to explore the same things. So don't be afraid to be yourself and write what you love, write what makes you happy and gets you excited and makes you feel fulfilled, because there's other people who feel the same way.
Well, thank you. What a great note to end on. Thank you, panelists, for being here once again, and thank you all for watching this important topic.